MMA is as exhilarating and fun a sport to watch as anything you can get your hands on these days. But we can sometimes forget just how dangerous a game it can be. For this video, we're taking a look at the scariest finishing sequences, the ones that took things to a different level entirely. As always, if you guys enjoy the video, please be sure to let us know by giving it a like and hitting that subscribe button so you don't miss any future uploads. Without further ado, let's get into it. Jaylen Turner versus Bobby Green. And we're going to kick things off with a very modern entry next. A stoppage so bad that the MMA community immediately declared it the worst in the history of the sport. And yeah, it was pretty bad. Jaylen Turner managed to tag his opponent Bobby Green early in their fight, sending the veteran fan favorite crashing to the canvas in one of the bout's first exchanges. Turner immediately jumped on Green to get the finish, and it was painfully obvious that Green was out of it. But the ref didn't budge, and so Turner just kept wailing on him, landing about a dozen unanswered concussive blows. And man, when the finish came, there was no joyous celebration from the fans. We were all just left sitting there scratching our heads. A brutal and potentially career-altering finishing sequence. Michael Venom Page versus Evangelista Cyborg Santos. We couldn't make a video about horrific MMA moments and not give a mention to this brutal knockout from the catalog of the soon-to-be UFC-rostered Michael Venom Page. There are still many questions to be answered about this guy's suitability for the highest level, but if one thing is for certain, it's that he can catch anyone if they give him an opening. And when the time came for MVP to take on the weathered old soldier Evangelista Cyborg Santos, we had no idea what to expect. But Page proved that he was more than up to the task early on. And when he finally saw his opening, he nailed Cyborg in the face with a perfectly timed flying knee. And he caught him with the sharp point of his kneecap so accurately that he managed to cave in Santos' skull. You can just tell by his reaction that something was off. It wasn't quite a concussive blow. No, this was a face-destroying shot that reportedly could have killed the veteran. Thankfully, it didn't, but it still resulted in the end of his MMA career. Sean Carwin versus Frank Mir. There's just something about seeing an old legend taking unnecessary punishment. Like, it's one thing that they're getting beaten by the next generation, but to see them edge towards retirement with a beating that they would never be in a position to take in their prime, yeah, it sucks. And watching Shane Carwin hammering blow after blow on Frank Mir was kinda like that. Sure, Mir was always in a tough spot with this matchup, but even the commentary booth were convinced that this fight was over. And by the time the ref actually stepped in, Frank had gone out cold. Francis Ngannou versus Alistair Overeem. Has there ever been a more powerful punch thrown in the UFC octagon than the shot that Francis Ngannou landed on Alistair Overeem? Well, in our opinion, this one is pretty much unbeatable in the power department. Ngannou's uppercut was thrown with truly mean intentions, and it came upwards with such force that it damn near took the ream off his feet. And that follow-up shot, the diving forearm slash, it was straight out of the Dan Henderson playbook. But instead of an oversized middleweight, this was 260 pounds of Cameroonian heavyweight steel coming down on Overeem's chin. It's no wonder it took such a long time for Alistair to get back to his feet. A truly shocking knockout moment, and one that made Ngannou a bankable star for the promotion. Gary Goodridge versus Paul Herrera. We don't even know what to say about this one. 12-6 elbows are no longer legal in MMA. And regardless of how you feel about that rule, this shocking stoppage of Paul Herrera by Gary Goodridge from the crucifix position was just a terrible referee moment. There's no doubt about it. Every single unanswered elbow blow here was doing more damage than some fighters take in an entire year. Goodridge is a beast, yes, but it's hard not to cringe while watching this one. A devastating finish by any metric. Gabriel Gonzaga versus Miro Korp. Beating a fighter with his own signature technique is such a major flex in the MMA world because when you manage to KO the greatest heavyweight head kicker of all time with a head kick, that is a highlight that most fighters would kill for. But the exact manner in which Gabriel Gonzaga stopped Miro Korp was violent enough, even without that added context. It doesn't matter who these guys were, this was a brutal head kick finish. And the way that Krokop fell to the canvas just made it worse. We wouldn't be surprised if he injured his leg too on this one. A career-defining win for Gonzaga, and some unfortunate proof that Mirko's best days were probably behind him. Chris Weidman versus Mark Munoz. This next one was kinda unfortunate because even as we watched live, it was hard to know exactly what had happened. But once we saw just how perfect an elbow Chris Weidman had managed to land on Mark Munoz, it became clear that this was a very late stoppage. In fact, you could have very easily stopped this one as soon as this elbow connected. But unfortunately, this clean shot was followed up by a barrage of unnecessary strikes. And though Munoz did eventually return to the cage, he never found the form that led him to this bout with Weidman. A tough one for this fan favorite, and a fight-ending sequence that could have benefited from a better job by the referee. Pat Curran versus Joe Warren. How about another absolutely abysmal stoppage? Well, this Bellator title fight really should have ended a lot quicker than it did. But when Pat Curran opened up with a huge strikes that Joe Warren absorbed, there were several points here where the ref could have, and probably should have, jumped in. You're really playing a dangerous game as a ref when you allow a fight like this to continue. Sure, the losing fighter could manage to find a way to survive, but by the rules of the sport, he has already technically lost. And Joe Warren was made to suffer 2 or 3 times the amount of damage that could qualify as one finish. A bizarre end to this fight. Dan Henderson versus Michael Bisping. Dan Henderson's right hand is called the H-bomb for a reason, folks. And after listening to Michael Bisping talking smack at him for weeks and weeks during their season of The Ultimate Fighter, Hendo just wanted to shut him up, once and for all. And with the eyes of the fighting world upon them at UFC 100, Henderson did just that, unloading a picture-perfect overhand right, catching Bisping as cleanly as any punch ever landed in the UFC. And just for good measure, Hendo decided to double up, firing off a brutal forearm smash, which he later admitted was just to get his revenge after all that trash talk. A scarily violent moment in the UFC octagon. Chad George versus Mark Vorges. And finally, though we've had a lot of fighters getting put out cold from a strike, this final one is a little different. Chad George had just managed to very craftily submit his opponent using a Von Flue choke, the type of technique that would go unnoticed by the majority of casual fans. And in this case, the referee totally failed to notice that Mark Vorges was out cold. George, being a truly good-hearted fighter, pleaded with the ref to stop, a request that was immediately shot down by the ref. In 9 out of 10 cases, the clearly unconscious Vorges might have been forced to eat some punches here, or even worse, spend more time in a choke. But thankfully, this potential crisis was averted when Chad George literally stood up and made his point crystal clear. If you enjoyed these battles as much as we like compiling them, please subscribe and hit the like button. Trust us, you'll want to know about all the crazy stuff that's going to happen next.